Hi, welcome to Expert Talks at Mavris. This is the interview series with thought leaders in the AI analytics and transformation space. My name is Mahadevann Iyerr, Mahaa for short. I'm your host for today. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mavris, which is a managed marketplace for analytics and business consultancy services. Our guest for today is V Ganapathy. Ganapathy is the Vice President and Head of Global Advanced Analytics Center of Excellence at Holcim. Prior to Holcim, he worked with Philips as Senior Director and Head of Business and Enterprise Analytics. He's also had stellar careers at Dell, AOL, Ford, and MRF. Ganapathy is a frequent speaker at industry forums and on the role and advances of analytics and AI. So Ganapathy, thank you so much for making time to talk to us on Expert Talks at Mavris.
Looking forward to, and thank you for inviting me. It's always good to stay connected on, what's happening in the industry and as well as to share and learn from each other. So thank you for that, Maha.
Thanks, Ganapathy. So Ganapathy, you've been a leader in the analytics and AI space for quite some time now. And so it'd be great to learn from your experience in terms of what are some of the critical success factors for analytics and analytics teams to be impactful in terms of creating business value. And within that, if you could also expand a little more on the importance of domain knowledge and situational awareness in the analytics and AI teams.
Yeah, I think you aptly use the word impactful, right? So you can always do analytics without any impact. Right? So, I think based on what I've learned so far, and I'm still learning. So, from my experience as well as my interactions with my peers and teams, I think I will put these success factors into a couple of buckets. I think we start with, let's say, the overall culture of an organization. Now, when I say culture, there are enough definitions, but three, four key attributes of a culture. So the way you can imagine is, culture is like that water in the fish tank, which makes the fish thrive. Now, specific to analytics, AI use cases. So first thing is, what is the ability in the organization to identify, transform, assimilate, a lot of the internal, external knowledge and the research and the practices, right? So how do we pick that up? Second thing is an ongoing test and learn mindset. Are you good at experimentation? Are you good at taking calculated risks? And if you learn, are you good in sharing the information widely and rapidly ramping up? Or if at all you fail, do you fail cheap and then bake that into your next experiment? The third, thread within the culture will be that, do people have a tendency to find new objects or new opportunities in the things they encounter in a day-to-day environment? So the curiosity, the attention to detail, or it's like, I want to be like a machine. It doesn't matter what happens in my surroundings. So these are some of the key attributes from a cultural perspective. I've been really accelerating the analytic initiatives. Now, the second bucket is basically what are the capabilities you need to create impactful analytics. Now, the capabilities also depends upon where are you currently, what's your baseline, and what are your ambitions. Depending on ambitions, the rate at which you'll improve your maturity on your capabilities will change. And which industry are you, what is the competition present, what are the landscape. Now, capability I would bucketize into, let's say, 4 or 5 categories. First, I think one of the most important thing is the entire business centricity, right? So how good are you in terms of aligning your projects and initiatives to the business priorities? Do data scientists directly and closely work with the business champions? And what is the way in which you execute projects? So when we say agile, there's a bit of a difference between the agile process we do in the software development and probably what we do in, let's say, an AI or a data science project. We are much more iterative even within sprint. And that perspective, AI agile is slightly different from, I would say, software agile, right? So you also evolve some of them. And then do you have a practice for building a business case for every initiative? Do you track it? Do you just do a POC or leave it like that? Or do you actually scale it up and then, measure what impact did you create? So this is all related to how business centered are you from an analytics team. Second thing is we need the data assets. Every organization has got data silos. If somebody says all my data is complete, full, clean, treated, readily available, a bit of a fiction there, right? So all of us have seen that, right? And then how pragmatically you are able to bring together your various data assets. And this could be internal, external, structured. Do you need it batch is okay? Do you need it real time, or are you okay with your near real time? So all these things become part of your. And then one always tip to keep in mind is do not wait for, let's say, your IT landscape harmonization or IT systems integration. That may always take some time depending upon where are you channelizing your investment, but is there a pragmatic way to get it all together, get the use cases up and running, create some ROI and plug it back to, improvise your infrastructure. And that logically lands up into, let's say, the third capability, which is the platform. So platform essentially means I cannot do things manually, humanly in one small computer. How do I scale it up, right? So how do I have the platform set up to for a rapid start of AI initiatives, or do I need to wait for 6 months to get started a project? Right? This become big important. And then once it is a POC or a project is successful, how do I scale it up? How do I set up my ML ops? Preferably, nowadays we only talk about cloud-based platforms and mostly open source that gives you the flexibility. And then we talk about the entire gamut of data warehouse and data marts and lakes and now data mesh. And then the ability to create quick and fast sandboxes for your data scientists and analytic workbenches for your business users. So all of them will come under your platform capability. And then once you have the data, once you have the platform, now what do you do with it? Then you will land up into logically the data science capability, right? This is essentially apart from the stats and algorithms and the modeling. There is one thing we sometimes tend to miss is the entire data engineering part. So we all keep talking, right? More than 75% of every project you spend time in, cleaning, harmonizing. So the data engineering is a very key success element as part of the data science projects. Sometimes we tend to underestimate. Now, all the way from ingesting, transforming, ranking, creating single versions of truth. Now, depending on the nascency of the journey, if an organization is too new, then you start with, let's say, center of excellence where you bring in all data science talent together, create a center of gravity, accelerate, create that visibility. And as you mature, maybe you get into, let's say, a hub and spoke where you have a central team still harmonizing ways of working platform tools, but then you start creating that, planting that spokes in each of the businesses so they can be closer to the business. To the matured state where you have fully federated, right? Each unit, each business entity have their own analytics team, and they keep exchanging information. And this also is a function of, I would say, the industry you belong to, what kind of data you have, how competitive are you in. And then finally, you also have the fundamental or the backbone, which is your governance, right? So the moment you have a risk there, everything comes to a standstill. Now, the governance could be all the way into, who can access data, how do you store it, do you have some defined guidelines on what are acceptable usage and not acceptable usage, and you also need to keep in the the law of the land where you're operating. And along with it, how do you monitor and manage your data quality, because garbage in, garbage out, we all know. Now, coming to the point of what I started at the beginning, right? Do I go all out and get the highest level of maturity in the day one? Probably no, because it's too much of a effort. So general practice, I have seen it also working, is you do incremental progress, right? So if you need a capability at a particular level of maturity for a given use case, go for it. Use that to build the next level of maturity. So you take incremental steps that eases out your pressure on payback on investment, that eases out on your ROI, when are you able to show, etc. Now, so given the 4 or 5 capabilities and the culture, then comes the domain knowledge, right? So the way I look at it is, let's say we can be put into 2 tracks. One is your initiatives are all related to on a research track, right? Let's say, for example, how companies have built LLMs as an example, right? Now that is industry agnostic. It is available as a product. You can use it, customize it. So here, the domain knowledge is not at the stage of build and development. It's more at the stage of deployment and customization. Now, the second, where most of us belong to, is within an organization, how do you drive analytics? Here, my personal experience is the domain expertise is very, very key. So there are school of thoughts, let me bring in brute computing power, throw out every possible feature into the machine and get the output. Or do I do a feature engineering with structured input from my SMEs or the domain experts? So I've seen projects have a high rate of success where you put data scientists, couple them with business experts or SMEs, we'd call it. And the example of future engineering I spoke about, right? It's much more efficient to hear the business side of it, then you try to put the data side of it, then jointly develop, what are the features which are apt for your business case. And I also seen some of the great data scientists are always they became great because they work closely with the business, right? So that perspective, I would say organizational within enterprise projects, domain expertise is an absolute key enabler, at least based on what I've seen in the last, a few decades I've been in this industry for now.
Excellent, very nicely articulated. So, so at a high level, culture, capability, and domain knowledge coming through collaboration with business. I mean, these are the top points, and within that, you articulated the various sub points that one needs to build, both in terms of all the three aspects to be creating impact in analytics. Great. Mm-hmm. So that brings me to the next question, which is when as analytics teams we are trying to support the business, there is a spectrum of requirement, right? On one side, there is there are business exigent problems for which business is looking for quick turnaround, in some cases possibly silver bullets also, right? Well, I don't believe one exists, but there is a expectation you get the analytics team and then tell me a silver bullet type of stuff. And then there is the other part, which, like you said, is like the LLMs or others, which are predominantly deep breakthrough type of models, which are more strategic and transformational in nature, but they have a long-term impact, right? So there is one way of trying to create an impact for now, which is to solve for the immediate problem, and the other is more strategic and transformational nature, right? So what has been your experience of, over the years? Is the proportion of one to the other shifting? And what do you think has been more important in your own business relationship building with, the subject matter experts or the, business stakeholders?
This is a very commonly asked question. Every day we encounter this, right? Someone says, as the head of analytics or, the CDA or CDO, what are your priorities? Some of the best answers, or even personally, what I believe is, should you focus on short term or long term? The quickest answer is both. Yeah, you need to be able to show quick success via quick wins, and which can help you to get a faster payback. That will actually help you to secure investment for some of your long term ambitions. Now, ideally, whenever you create a, let's say, digital roadmap or let's say data monetization roadmap, it always helps to identify some quick wins. Now, one is you can get faster business impact realization. You can show some results to the management. It helps to keep the team motivated. It keeps to show progress to the management, etc. And having said that, there are always, all of us know, some investments are required for your long-term goals. Right? A good example is most of them will come on your foundational capabilities. Let's say you want to build a data lake, you want to deploy a data catalog. Now, if someone tells you, show me an ROI in 3 months, hard. So this is where, how do you align with the vision of the organization? If your analytics or digital roadmap in alignment, then it's easy to explain. So moment your digital analytics roadmap is a fallout of your business roadmap, some of the discussion becomes very, very easy and not as a standalone. And that is where all these questions come. Why should I invest now? Can I wait? Are we ready? Do we have enough data? So for the best ways, what is that we can do to create some quick wins, create some results? And then other way to look at, where do you want to balance your short-term, long-term is, as a business, what are the capabilities? Bring in a capability way. What are the business processes where I want to have, which are foundational for me, which are core, and where I want to be differentiating, which I call the strategic business capabilities. Now, there will always be some firefighting you need to do on your foundational core, etc. But it's always easy to, ask for investment for long-term goals, especially a building related to your differentiating capability. So this is where the linkage between what you are building from an analytics perspective, how closely it is aligned to some of your business capability which you want to develop, and that is invariably a fallout of your business strategy. So not any, like you rightly said, not any silver bullet, but a optimal balance of get things moving. Don't wait for the end of data. So generally, we always recommend, right? When you start a POC, don't go wait for all the 100 features in the data. Maybe initially your ML accuracy is in the range of 60, 70, but then improvise it. It's always good to have something get moving, collect the user feedback, start tuning the model rather than endlessly waiting, let me get all my data in, then I figure it out what to do with the data. So this had been my own experiences from the various projects I have been engaged.
Agree. So you're saying it helps, quick turnaround projects which are more agile, not necessarily, highly accurate, but can create quick short-term
some value out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Can build business confidence and at the same time keep the analytics team motivated.
Mm-hmm.
It also gives us the leverage to ask for investment for more strategic things, which we understand are more foundational in nature. But will take its own time to create the level of business value visibility.
Yeah, for your future use cases as well. Yeah.
Now, I saw in one of your interviews sometime back where you said the opportunity for cross-domain analytics, right, where you can connect the dots, has a multiplier effect in terms of business value, right? And I agree with that. However, one of the challenges I have seen in most organizations I've worked is even in global capability centers, analytics teams are typically structured in a functional manner, and in most GCCs, there is an umbilical cord to that functional business, that particular function operating in the business, right? So you have, maybe a marketing analytics, you have a supply chain analytics, you have maybe, in the retail world, a store analytics, or pricing analytics in the product space. And all of these typically have some sort of umbilical cord to that particular functional transformation leader in the business itself, in whichever geography they operate, right? So what are some of the approaches one could use to, really get people together to help connect the dots? What could be the approach and who should typically own it? Or, how does one establish either ownership or leadership in this space and make this happen?
I'm not sure which interview you are referring to, but and I'm glad my views have not changed. I still believe there is value in cross-domain projects. Not that the individual verticalized domain projects are not or less valuable, but there is the complex problems are always cutting across domains. Now, the way to look at it is probably, indeed, there is an advantage in organizing with a depth lens in mind. So I want specialization in pricing analytics, supply chain analytics, marketing. And then there could also be opportunities to look at projects which are across the breadth of the organization, right, which is the cross-domain. Now, you may need both. It really depends upon where you see in your roadmap cross-domain pictures or projects coming in. But one way, we have always approached in many of the organizations I have engaged with is bring in an enterprise value chain view. So what I mean by that is, let's say you start with your customer journey. Identify the key personas for each of the key personas. Look at what is the customer wanting to do when they are discovering for a solution, right, in the discovery phase. Then they go into the evaluation, the typical customer journey, right? Then what do they do when they buy your product or solution? They engage with you, and how do you want to build a long-term retention advocacy for your customers? And then at each stage, start looking for or get a mapping of what are the emotional functional needs of a customer at each part of the journey. So that typically is your starting point. Now, in order to meet those expectations, again, both functional, emotional needs of a customer throughout the journey, as an organization, you have some actions to take, right? So when a customer is looking for a product, you have to be there through a appropriate media to explain your product and your presence in that market. Now, what are the various jobs you want to do? Bring in the job student concept to be done concept in each of the stages. Now, once you start mapping this is where most of the discovery happens, that what are my business processes across domain which are highly dependent, right? Now, once that becomes very clear, and depending on your use case and where are your biggest opportunities, now either you take a domain angle or a cross domain angle. In many cases, you may even take a cross domain, right? Now, when you pair up your data scientist to work on cross-domain outside of one's domain, it actually helps him or her to gather wider business knowledge as well as context building. Now, it's very similar to, what this triggers me is my Six Sigma Master Black Belt days, where we typically allocate black belts, smartest black belts on cross-domain projects. Yeah. Now, and at the same time, when we allocate projects to a black belt, we always make sure that the person works across multiple domains, and that really helps them to start linking, the dependency of department A to department B. And nowadays, with the connected enterprise, most of your problems which are complicated, which gives you biggest ROI, always tend to be cross-domain. So because it's no longer that I have my own system, my own department, I don't talk to each other. That doesn't reflect an integrated customer experience to be provided. So predominantly, your biggest buck, to summarize, I think value for the money is in the cross-domain. But you may also need certain amount of a domain-wise maturity to start running some of those projects. Because if your data maturity in one domain is very poor, even if you want to do something which engages business process from that domain, then you have a problem there, right? So
Got it.
hopefully the view also will not change unless something dramatically comes up. But over a period of years, my experiences are further reinforced this view that joining hands between functional domains, between business processes, always has the potential to create incremental value.
Oh, I absolutely agree. As in, it's about trying to create a flow across the entire process, right? I mean, multiple processes and cross-domain processes, which is literally from starting from farm to fork, as they say in the retail world, or from production to the consumer type of stuff. And the more you can create. So essentially, what you're saying is you looking at starting from the customer and the value stream and saying what is the areas where you can create maximum impact is a great way of possibly looking at cross-domain opportunities, which can have the maximum impact from a customer perspective and hence the business perspective. And within that, while picking those projects, you're saying we need to ensure that the domains that it impacts have a reasonable level of maturity in their own process and data frameworks, so it is then easier to implement when you take over. Excellent, great. So now so you are currently with Holcim, which is building materials company, and before that you were with Philips, which is predominantly a B2B and a B2C healthcare product company. So and you've led analytics, you lead analytics in Holcim, you've been leading at Philips, you're leading in Philips. So are there, two or three key business KPIs that you as an analytics leader look at to say, okay, if these are the KPIs that I track for the business, then I think as an analytics leader, I can step in and help solve for them. So are there any, is it separate for both companies? Is it largely same? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so obviously I will not talk about specific related to organization, but the learning always had been, to look at, holistically your enterprise value chain, right? Break it down the sub processes, what are your opportunities, and then the second dimension indeed is, do you have good quality data, right? And good quality data, and nowadays when we talk about AI, you also need a large quantum of data, right? Unless you're able to create synthetic data, etc., which is difficult in most of the cases, but generally the two thumb rule is, am I good enough to go from a data availability perspective? Do you have enough size of the data so that I can start training my models? And once you have this data coming into picture, then it's always going to one level of detail. What is the intensity of data here? So certain organization may be highly customer intensive. You touch millions of customers. You have multiple channels to reach a customer. So hence a lot of data around there. Some organizations can be predominantly operations focused. So on the delivery, logistic, fulfillment side, a lot of data coming in. Some companies could be more on the, let's say, on the support side, HR, finance, IT. I have a large workforce for training, talent, hiring, recruitment. I have a lot of amount of data there. And also from a risk perspective, if I'm a financial organization, I have much more risk focus, right? So bring in per process domain of, let's say, customer or operations or your support functions, what exactly is your intensity of data? So you have one dimension which is talking about your intensity of data, and another dimension which is your enterprise value chain. Where do you see? And the right sweet spot is a combination of these two, right? So if you can imagine a 2 by 2 grid where my data intensity is quite high and then my opportunities are high from a business process, then I have the sweet spot. So generally that becomes a good way to start in arriving at your top 2, 3 priorities. And once you double click each one of them, you always get into what are the quick wins, what are some of the medium term projects, what are some of the long term projects. Now coming about, let's say the construction industry or building materials, generally, most of them are highly capital intensive. So for your ROCI and, your investments you make, what is going to be a payback, your uptime of your machinery, all of them are going to be quite critical for success. And similar to any other process industry, like let's say oil and gas, your energy is one of your key component in your cost of goods sold. And then sustainability is a must. It's one of the key focus areas for many organizations as we speak across industries. So for given this context in mind, driving sustainability in your end-to-end operations, let's say how can you drive your asset utilization, improve your ROCI, how can you enhance productivity in your operational workflows, so can you predict your downtimes, can you move into more predictive maintenance than, let's say, nobody wants to have a breakdown maintenance, right? How can you leverage AI for process controls, automated process controls, thereby, you eliminate waste, you improve your throughput time, you improve your OEE, and then in your fulfillment processes, can you embed intelligence in the process itself through sensors, to devices? How do you connect the sensor data with your enterprise data? How can you drive? Now, what works for one organization may not be readily work for another, but I think as long as your analytics roadmap is a derivative of your business strategy, and some of the approaches I mentioned in terms of go for in one axis where you have high intensity of data, which again is a function of your quality and quantum and what is important for you, and then the second axis is your business processes where you see business value. So a combination of this 2 by 2 grid, and then what your industry is doing, what your competition is doing. If you have all these things in front of you, it's relatively easy to arrive and explain to the stakeholders and what should be my top 2, 3 priorities in the short term and long term to go and then hence create an analytics roadmap. And unless otherwise stated, it always is a very good start point, and then you collect with your input with your business champions, business leaders, and then continuously fine tune it.
Got it. Yeah, so looking at a 2 by 2, like you said, enterprise value and data intensity, and then picking the low-hanging fruits, the mid to long-term type of opportunities. Yeah, thank you. Nicely articulated. Now, the next question is very interesting because I keep talking of domain expertise, domain knowledge, and literally the last 15 years of my life till I started my business, I've been in the retail space, right? So one tends to say, oh, you've been in the retail space. I've been on the supply chain side of it, the entire buy, move, sell, as they call in retail. I have exposure, and the customer side of it, so I have exposure. So, and that is why I understand the business well, and that is why I'll be able to create value. This is one side of the story as a business transformation and analytics thing. In your case, you have worked across and worked successfully and done very well across almost literally 5 industry sectors. You're currently in the construction building material space. Before that, in the healthcare product space. You've been with Dell in the computer hardware thing, right? Ford in the automobile. So it'll be interesting to understand. So. What are your thoughts on that? So, are there learnings from certain industry, which best practices, learnings, approaches, which you think are applicable in other industries, and that is why a person who's got more cross-industry experience is able to add a lot more value. Number one, and equally because there are industry shifts that you're doing. What are some of the approaches for you to quickly gather the context and be able to engage with business? Are there some hacks for that?
I'm not sure it's good or bad. So I did have the opportunity to work across multiple industries, and I wanted it. Right? Personally, I felt there is value in learning from each industry. The dynamics are different, the complexities are different. The customer journey is different. How operations work in a particular industry is different in another. What's the competition landscape? There are a lot of things to learn. At the same time, not discounting the fact, I also have a lot of best colleagues and friends who have been in an industry or become experts there. So that is also a good track. But I think one point to keep in mind is even in the case of uh, within an industry, right? No longer there are hard boundaries, right? So let me try to illustrate with an example. Again, taking the customer, right? Let's say in the B2B context, customers are all getting influenced not just by that particular trend in that particular industry, but their touch points in across the industries. Now, that is a very important thing when you want to deep dive into the customer side of it. So let's say in the B2B side, we have a customer persona who is in the procurement function, right? Now, we would expect that person to be, looking forward to get experience with are predominantly prevalent in the current industry. But as a person, that particular he or she is also a consumer. Maybe he or she have ordered an online order in an online platform where he or she can track the order status with a click of a button. He or she gets delivery statuses, and how user feedbacks are collected and stored, etc., etc. It is very normal that the same person now wears the hat of a B2B customer and then expect the same amount of experiences from you as a B2B supplier. Now, how good are you in sensing this customer trend? How good are you in anticipating? Really is a key accelerator in your success versus your competition, right? So, if the customer is not getting limited or the customer expectations are not getting limited to one industry, there isn't much reason for you to limit yourself to one industry. So that is one key takeaway, right? So in other words, what I have seen is from a data science analytics perspective, there aren't hard boundaries. Obviously, domain knowledge is very, very important, but from a tools, technical knowledge, platforms, approach, it is applicable across industry. And the more diverse you are, the more additional perspectives you can bring to the table. The data intensity I spoke about might vary. The risk appetite and the risk focus might vary. But the most of the capabilities which we spoke in the beginning of the interview or the podcast, they are going to be not that significantly different. You go to an auto industry, you go to a finance industry, you go to a manufacturing industry, you still need data, you still need platform, you need data science, you need to have the ability to work with the businesses, etc. So for you to have a successful data monetization strategy, the levers are pretty much common across industry. I will not say exactly 100% same, but it's an 80-20 principle. So having experience in multiple industries personally have helped me. And in fact, some of the great data scientists I have come across, they've all worked multiple domains, multiple industries. And that also helps them to bring in, what kind of an outside-in views we can bring in. So a good example is even not just in analytics, right? So when I moved from, let's say, the automobile industry, where, I was also part of the business improvement journey as part of the Six Sigma deployment. So when I moved from, let's say, the automobile industry into a customer service industry, a lot of the processes were highly replicable from an auto industry into a customer support world in terms of identifying wastages in your end-to-end value chain. How do you cut down turnaround time for your customer? How do you institutionalize processes? How do you establish process control? At the same time, establishing process control with machines is much easier than with people. So that is indeed a difference. But the mindset approach, creating metrics, creating measurement systems, bringing in the customer view when you are building up your value stream map, those things don't change between an auto industry or between a customer support industry. So that had been one of my big transitions from a pure production world into a customer service world when I moved from from an automobile journey into the process improvement deployment onto the customer support industry is almost about 15-18 years before now.
Excellent. Nice. So we will shift into something else. Now, explainable AI is becoming, a very talked about point, right? And so while deep learning models tend to give a lot more of accuracy, for many people it's like a black box, right? So there is this thing where possibly a decision tree can give a lot more of explainability about why and how something is impacting an outcome. The accuracy levels could be far lesser compared to a deep learning model, which could be highly accurate, but the business doesn't understand, it's like a black box, what is really mixing and matching before the outcome comes up, right? So what's your take on explainable AI? So will it find a balance in between accuracy and explainability, or are there trends where you can have the cake and eat it too, which is have explainability, also high levels of accuracy?
Accuracy. See, there is again my view. Yeah, so a lot of research happening in this area. So the reason DL models are there in our use cases is their ability to learn from the abstract level features, which are difficult with some of the other techniques and even difficult to intercept for a human brain. And that is where computer vision and object detection and image captioning, predominantly all these use cases we have DL in the background, right? Now that is also one of the main reasons for their lack of explainability. But the question is, where do you want to use what tool? Yeah. Now, especially this becomes very, very stark when you have cases where you make decisions out of the insights coming out of such a model. We have a lot of examples, right? Did you approve my loan or not? Can you tell me why did you reject? I'm a candidate. Tell me why did you reject me or hired me? How do you avoid bias? Now the question is, in most cases, in some of these examples we spoke about, there are also regulatory requirements, right? So where you are mandated to have those transparency and explainability. Generally, as you rightly said in the beginning, we don't use DL where we have to explain, number one, right? And number two, where you have to identify the top features. So if you are using a regression technique, very easy, go pick up the top variables. You have a sensitivity index, you know how to simulate it. For those use cases, DL is not a good fit. And then especially when you're in pursuit of accuracy, you want to do some parameter tuning, you want to play around with your learning rate, you play around with the batch size, it's not that easy to do with DL techniques. But having said that, I've also come across some research papers where I think the approach is something like this, right? So you have the multiple layers. Now look at each layer, the input and the output, and then can we look at the data structure to get more view around what happens in each of those layers. Now from there, you try to do some sort of a reverse engineering, that which layer is more apt and which layer, what transformation happened. But still, good to see in the research papers, but personally, I've not come across scalable solutions to eat the cake and have it too, in your language, right? So maybe we'll wait because a lot of things we thought impossible, 5 years ago is possible now.
Okay.
So maybe this is a problem which our experts in this field will definitely solve. But there are actions happening. There are a lot of papers available in this area. But at this point in time, bit of a tough luck to have a model which can predict with high amount of accuracy using abstract features. At the same time, you want to be able to take it to a business guy or take it to a customer and explain. That still, based on my best knowledge, continues to be a hard ball on the table.
Sure. So it's still work in progress, literally, as in from a research perspective. Now, any discussion on analytics and AI without talking about generative AI, ChatGPT. I mean, and maybe the precursor to that is the low code, no code type of platform, whatever. So there's this whole future of AI. People are talking of. Everybody seems to be on the bandwagon called ChatGPT and generative AI and what all it can do, right? And the fact that if you have context and you're able to prompt well, then you could find solutions type of stuff. Right? So AI seems to be almost increasingly saying that if you have a good understanding of business and what you want to look for, AI is going to be easy to use type of stuff. At least that's the mindset that people seem to be encouraged with. On the other side, there's this whole future of work where and it essentially got accelerated because of COVID, where people have started working from wherever, whenever, fractional work, a lot more of migration to freelance happening. So there is this whole journey and movement that is happening there. From your own, and there's almost like crystal ball gazing, like, do you see the future of AI and future of work, right? At some point in time, merging in such a way that work, multiple fractional people across the globe could come together and solve for it. Do you see this? Will they, in some sense, complement or feed off each other?
So interesting question. This is an area where we discover, you don't know what you don't know, right? So the way, I would structure my thought is, look at where do you anticipate what level of impact from AI, then look at what is going to happen to the roles, and then that translates into the way of working, right? So what I picked up from some of the research papers in this domain is, it's the AI revolution is not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen in let's say stepwise or different levels of, right? So the easiest start point everywhere, is what we call the assisted AI. Right? It is not going to replace somebody; it is going to assist. So it'll assist me to do my job better. It is going to take out repetitive tasks from me. Some of the repetitive tasks, not everything I do as an employee or a role. So that is usually the first wave of AI revolution. Then progressively, comes the second wave, which is where some of the functions or tasks under some conditions, right, are taken care of without human intervention. So independent in some tasks under some conditions, but not all conditions. For example, an autonomous vehicle can do in restricted plain roads, but cannot maneuver in crowded roads for boundary conditions. A good example, right? Third one is all the tasks are taken over, but again in some predefined conditions, and obviously boundary conditions always poses exceptional challenges to solve from an autonomy perspective. And then finally, you may have all tasks in most of the boundary conditions. So this is where we go in two dimensions, right? One is the task dimension and one is the scenario or the situation dimension. So you start with some task assist, then you go into some task under some conditions, which is the next arc we talk about. Then you go into many circumstances and most of the tasks, and finally all circumstances, all tasks, right? So now what level of autonomy you want, especially from a business context, really depends upon what is that you want to achieve, right? Just for the sake of autonomy, if there is no value in it, nobody is going to invest on it, right? Now for getting to various AI levels, there are different skills you may need, right? Now to look at what is going to happen when this AI is going to affect me in this particular levels, right? One way to look at it is for each role, look at what each role has got, let's say, a physical component to it. I need to do some physical activities in my role. So if I'm a material handling, packaging guy on a warehouse, I have a lot of physical activities, right? There is a component in me. Or if I'm a person doing assembly of vehicles in a manufacturing line, I have a lot of physical components, right? Then there is a bit of a social component. Do I need to talk to a customer? Do I need to, if I'm in the healthcare world, do I need to talk to a patient? Do I need to provide consultancy? There is a bit of a social element to it, right? The third way to look at it is what is the third component? What kind of cognitive ability I need to do my job. So in my job content, again, further divide this cognitive ability into basic cognitive skills as well as advanced cognitive skills. Now, in the 403 buckets, the physical role or component in the role, social component in the role, and the basic and advanced cognitive. Obviously, the physical is where AI is going to quickly replace, right, or assist. So we have robots doing the welding job in a car assembly line. We have equipment which does all the heavy lifting. We have automated storage recovery retrieval systems in warehouses. You punch a code and you can retrieve it. People don't have to go. You don't have to drive a forklift. So a lot of that role where physical activity, quickly AI comes in and then the work gets significantly changed. Cognitive again, you have some of the best cognitive tasks which can be done by AI much better than human beings. So that is also it is not a big deal to see a progressively, more and more component being handled by AI. Now, the social part seems to be the biggest or the hardest for AI at this point in time, right? So, as a customer, I still want to talk to a sales guy. If I'm a patient, I still want to go talk to a doctor. So, if my role involves a lot of social aspect of it, it's going to be taking a bit of time. So, my work is not going to change. But if my work has got significantly higher amount of physical content or the basic and advanced cognitive, most likely my work of the future or the work of the future is going to change. Now, this entire same thought process can be applied to the role of a data scientist, the role of a data engineer, the role of a business analyst, and even to the role of a business champion, right? So, if depends on my role, then these components come into play, and then very well I can expect. And it's better to be prepared for the change rather than saying that, hey, my job, my role, my industry is immune to the AI revolution. Probably, you're going to get caught unaware. So that is how I looked at your question, Maha.
Yeah, so I mean, people to people interaction, the emotional, social part of it, the ability to communicate, the ability to think possibly, beyond boundaries, or innovate. Those are the skills, collaborate. These are the skills that I think will be placed at increasing premium as parts which are more repetitive and more intelligent in nature can possibly get automated or even physically.
Just to add to the list you just mentioned, a couple of years ago we used to also add poetry.
Correct.
And now that we have a different view now, right?
Correct.
So in the recent context, some of this content creation, there's a different view on the table now because they are highly likely to be replaceable. So this view is based upon the current development we have. But looking at the pace in which things are changing, maybe some of our views will change a year or two from now.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be interesting time ahead. So that brings me to the last question. What would be your top 2 or 3 advice for a budding data analyst or a data scientist? Right? What are some of the things that they need to bring into their muscle capability or strengths that they need to work on?
So I still remember a couple of years ago when the entire term data scientist was gaining momentum. We were in one of the industry conferences. They were a 2-hour workshop to define who is a data scientist. That is where it all evolved, right? So initially it was all like, someone with a PhD, research background. Then the trend changed to, hey, someone should also know stat. Someone should also be able to play around with, the programming languages, Python and R and Scala and Spark, and you name it, you have them in the market. Then it said someone should also be able to do computing at scale, how to leverage some of these platforms. And then the business domain context, which we already spoke about, right? So I think a unique mix of someone who understands statistics. So you can always go to a library or a program and do some model. But then if you don't understand what happens in that code, then you are not a good data scientist. Okay, you should be able to explain it, deploy it, and then link it to the business problem. So understanding of the algorithms. When someone says I did a random forest, I should know what is this random in that. Okay, why do you call it as a forest? Because you go randomly in multiple features. You go horizontally, you go vertically. So you should be able to link it to why these algorithms are used in those use cases. I can be using any algorithm for every use case, right? So understanding of where what fits in is part of the skill set. And indeed, being hands-on with some of the programming language is always good. And then I think one area where currently data scientists are not that hands-on, I would say, is again on the data engineering side of it. It's a good understanding of how do you bring in, handle, transform data at large scale. Obviously, you will always work with a data engineer in your team, but it's very important for a data scientist to start doing features discovery, start defining what are those transformation rules which you want a data engineer to automate it for you. So a combination of stat, programming languages, business context, cloud computing, the data handling skill sets, and then that comes the most important thing, which is your articulation skills. So very good data scientist, very good in technique, very good in statistics, but cannot communicate to business becomes hard. So someone should be able to put a visualization layer, which is what I call the articulation layer of all your knowledge and skill sets. I think that also becomes to be well versed and well adapted especially in an organizational context.
Got it. Yeah, so essentially, if I need to be a good data scientist, I need to have the ability to understand whatever I'm doing from almost first principles perspective, literally saying, why am I using a particular approach? That clarity needs to be there. Like you said, I need to have the appreciation of not just the model I'm building, but what it takes for the data to come into the model and go out to the model, which is the whole.
And why did I use that model for a given use case? Yeah.
Correct. And thirdly, like you said, the ability to articulate in terms of what you're trying to explain to the business in more simple and easy to understand terms. So excellent. Ganapathy, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you and a learning experience over the last 1 hour. Thanks again for making time to talk to us.
Thank you, Mahaa. Looking forward to.